A spreadsheet, a phone call, and then over 400 arrests. This case starts in a clinic, not a squad car. A Minnesota pediatrician flagged something off in federal child nutrition claims, and that tip helped ignite Operation Harvest, a synchronized multi-agency takedown with raids starting around 6 a.m. Investigators say the alleged fraud machine used children as the currency. More kids claimed as fed meant more reimbursements, while a layered network of nonprofits and shell organizations kept the operation scalable and hard to trace. So how did it stay hidden for so long? Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. So how does a pediatrician beat the people whose job is literally numbers? Because she wasn't hunting fraud. She was trying to make sense of kids. Dr. Amina Oay worked out of Rochester, Minnesota, with a schedule packed with the normal stuff families bring in every day. But she also spent time seeing patients at a free clinic in Minneapolis, in the Cedar Riverside area, where a lot of Somali American families live. That meant she didn't just hear about meal support programs as an abstract policy. She saw the same parents, the same school breaks, the same routines, and the same struggles show up again and again on intake forms. Then she started building a spreadsheet, not some fancy insider tool. She pulled from public records, matched it against what she was hearing in the exam room, and kept adding notes from the forms in front of her. And the longer she stared at it, the less the numbers behaved like real life. The claims climbed fast. New feeding sites seemed to multiply. The totals looked like they belonged to a huge system, not a handful of community operations. Here's the part that bothered her. When kids actually get meals, you can usually feel it in the room. You hear about where they ate. You hear complaints when the site closes. You hear a parent mention a certain building, a certain volunteer, a certain pickup routine. And when the calendar changes, the stories change too. School starts, schedules tighten, summer hits, families move around. Sick visits spike in waves. That's what a clinic sees. But the data she was tracking didn't slow down the way human routines do. It kept swelling in a straight line, like someone had turned the dial and left it there. And some of the kids she treated told her something even stranger. They said they'd never eaten at the sites listed on their enrollment forms. A few described being driven to a building, staying just long enough for someone to check their names off a list, and then going home. No meal, no line, no tray. Just a name turned into a number. That's where the personal risk kicks in, because if you're a doctor and you call this out, you're not accusing some faceless company. You're pointing at groups that present as charities, tied to real neighborhoods, real communities, and real needs. If you're wrong, you've just thrown suspicion on people doing legitimate work. If you're right, then kids aren't the ones being fed. They're the ones being used. And she understood one key thing that makes this kind of scheme possible. USDA meal programs reimburse based on volume. More meals served on paper means more money back. So if someone can produce paperwork that looks clean, the cash can flow even if the food doesn't. That's the whole vulnerability. You don't need a kitchen that matches the claims. You need forms that say it does. After working on her spreadsheet for months, she hit a wall where she couldn't just keep it to herself. She stayed up for 31 hours, spent 3 days locked in on the data, and then at 4:47 a.m., she called the FBI's Minneapolis office. She told them she believed hundreds of millions were being stolen and that children were the tool that made it work. Special Agent Carolyn Voss didn't get a neat package. She got circumstantial evidence, rough edges, and a civilian's spreadsheet. But she also saw what mattered. The architecture looked layered, planned, and bigger than a few opportunists. That call became a case file, then a case team, then subpoenas, data pulls, and bank records that don't care how good the story sounds. Payoff number 1. How did a pediatrician in Rochester spot $1 billion fraud just by staring at a spreadsheet? She caught a mismatch between claim volume and real-world conditions, and she understood that kids weren't just beneficiaries here. They were the metric that generated cash. And once that instinct turned into names, sites, and patterns, agents could start building a map the way they always do. Follow the money, follow the paperwork, and see who keeps showing up in the same places. Because after that, the case stops being about one suspicious set of claims and starts looking like a system designed to scale. And that's when the obvious question hits. If the meal counts were inflated, why didn't inspections shut it down early? Someone was supposed to walk into these sites, verify service, and stop the bleeding. So who benefited when the system kept nodding yes? Investigators say the alleged blueprint centered on Idris Warsome, with Horizon Youth Alliance acting as the clean public face. Around it sat more than 60 shell organizations, plus a long list of feeding sites that could be turned on and off depending on what the paperwork needed that month. It didn't have to look like one giant operation. It could look like dozens of small local groups, each with its own name, its own letterhead, its own community story. Here's where things got really interesting. Every site worked like a faucet. Report more kids fed, and the reimbursement rises. Add another site, and you add another faucet. Add 10, 20, 50, and the totals start jumping in a way that looks like growth, not theft. In 1 month alone, investigators say the alleged claims generated over $12 million. That's not a slow leak. That's a pipeline. On paper, oversight sounds sturdy. State administrators approve sites. Inspectors do visits. Forms get reviewed. Numbers get checked. Yet investigators say this ran for years and reached an estimated $1.2 billion over about 4 years. That gap matters because it suggests the scheme didn't only exploit rules. It exploited people, timing, and the simple fact that most systems trust what looks organized. And then the title of this story starts to make sense. Investigators say some inspectors had connections to the network. Not always obvious ones. Sometimes it's money through salaries. Sometimes it's side relationships. Sometimes it's relatives tied to the same sites being inspected. That kind of link doesn't have to erase oversight completely. It only has to soften it. A rushed visit here, a missing question there, a benefit of the doubt decision that keeps a site alive long enough to cash another round of checks. The alleged operation also leaned on practical tricks that don't look complicated until you stack them. Phantom sites that exist on paper more than in reality. Staged compliance where everything looks right during a visit. Paperwork that matches because it's built to match. Forms, rosters, counts, and signatures all moving in the same direction. And then there's the pipeline of names, the kind that can make claims look legitimate even if meals never hit a table. If the documents tell a smooth story, a quick inspection can turn into a rubber stamp. But paperwork has a weakness. It leaves a trail outside the program. Once agents started lining up deposits and reimbursements, the story couldn't stay inside forms anymore. Operation Harvest became a full map job. The FBI and ICE Homeland Security investigations worked alongside DHS, IRS criminal investigation, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Forensic accountants and intelligence analysts tracked the flow across 47 banks, with records subpoenaed from over 100 entities. That's what you do when you suspect the fraud isn't one bad actor. It's a network. As the money moved, investigators say it didn't just sit in accounts. They allege laundering through real estate purchases in Minnesota, Arizona, and Kenya, luxury vehicles registered to family members, and international wire transfers reaching accounts in Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom. At that point, you don't argue with a spreadsheet. You argue with timestamps, wire details, and closing documents. Payoff number 2. How does a fraud operation disguise itself as a children's charity, and what made Horizon Youth Alliance so convincing to federal oversight agencies? It copied the look of legitimate nonprofits, used volume-based reimbursement rules, spread risk across many entities, and allegedly neutralized oversight through insider links and controlled inspections. And when Operation Harvest finally lands with coordinated raids and over 400 arrests, it lands because the case no longer hangs on a single tip. It sits on a network diagram built from money trails and inspection weak spots. And that's when the second story starts creeping in. What happens to real kids and real programs when fake ones drain the pot? That's the part people miss. The weak spot wasn't only a rule book, it was the human layer where checks can be rushed, bent, pressured, or quietly redirected until a program meant to feed kids turns into a payout system. And the cost wasn't abstract. A real after-school meal program in North Minneapolis run by Grace Abalo shut down after the state flagged the area as oversaturated with sites because phantom providers warped the map and slowed reimbursements for the groups actually serving food. So what fixes it? More data cross-checks like bank patterns, site clustering, and claim velocity, or tougher ground verification? And how do you do that without treating whole communities like suspects? Agent Voss put it blunt: people chose not to look.